Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. James Presbyterian Church here on the corner of 141st Street and St. Nicholas Avenue in the village of Harlem in the city of New York, where we are reading our scriptures for our third Sunday in Lent. During this Lenten season, we are traveling through this journey with Christ, which ultimately, of course, will end up at the cross and at victory in the tomb. But we're going through it week by week in this the second set of lectionary readings for March 3rd, 2024. Usually here at St. James in our worship service and even in our Bible study, we consider that reading the Psalms is almost like an opening prayer, and tonight it will be our opening prayer. So we will be reading Psalm 19, verses 1 through 14. Psalm 19, verses 1 through 14. So as we read this, and Andrea joins us, let us hear the idea that this particular psalm is divine instruction, gives light and life to human beings. Like Psalm 1 and 119, this psalm insists that divine instruction, and the word for that in Hebrew is Torah, transforms humans. Some believe it can be divided into two components: a hymn to the Son, verses 1 through 6, and a meditation on wisdom, 7 through 14. But you will hear that this poem is very clearly coherent. Divine wisdom, discernible in the daily movements of the heavens, are visible in verses 1 through 4b. We'll talk more about that, particularly the sun's steady course. It's also visible in the teachings of 7 through 9, to which we, thank God, have access. And then the psalm concludes with a prayer that we are able to fulfill those teachings. Hear now Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. Yet there is no speech, nor are there words, and their voice is not heard. And yet their voices go out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In the heavens, he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy. And like a strong man, it runs its course with joy. Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit is to the end of them. And nothing is hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. And the commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. But who can detect their errors? Clear me from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from the insolent. Do not let them have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgressions. So let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Beautiful psalm, beautiful psalm. Mm-hmm. Verses 1 through 4, without a single word, being said, the sun leads this day and night rhythm of the heavens that manifests divine control. It's all a part of, if you remember the creation text, the creation of, God said, let there be light. And then there was the first day and the first evening. The way that the sun goes through the firmaments and goes through the sky is a divine way of moving things forward, and it keeps the order and the control of God's creation. And God has given authority to the sun to lead the course of the heavens. In comparable religious literature, the head of the pantheon of the gods is authorizes lesser deities to build their tent dwellings. The sun here symbolizes divine justice and wisdom. Why? Because nothing is hid from its rays. Verses 7 through 10, there are these 6 synonyms here for the instruction or law. Once again, the Hebrew Torah, the law, decrees, precepts, commandments, fear, and ordinances. These are different ways of seeing, and you see how they affect different parts of our human makeup, our soul, our wisdom for our simpleness, our heart, our eyes, helps us to endure in our lives and makes us righteous. And 7 through 9, the first 4 describes the law's beneficial effects on humans. The final 2 are concerned with the teaching itself rather than the effect of humans. So our soul, us being wise, our hearts and our eyes. And then the fact that the word itself, that it is pure and lasts, that it is true and righteous. And this desire that we desire it more than all the riches of the earth or the sweetest things that fill our appetites. And then verses through 11, the psalmist asks that the wisdom contained in the law continue to instruct our hearts. I love finding this out today in this particular study. But who can detect their errors? Clear me from hidden faults. Errors and faults are likely inadvertent sins, the sins that we don't recognize that we're moving into, but those subconscious things that we do that we find ourselves complicit. So it's like, clear me, because I can't detect some of these errors sometimes. So it's not about who can find the errors in us, but who can detect even our own errors sometimes in ourselves. So clear us from those hidden faults. And then the test, and that's where we end this. And then there's that beautiful prayer phrase. So with all of this, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable. You who are my rock, the one I depend on, my Redeemer. So this is our psalm, our opening psalm today that we see, Psalm 19, verses 1 through 14. Are there any thoughts that you all have around this text?
It's really so beautifully written. The words are really poetry.
Yeah. And I read verses 1 through 4 tonight, keeping in mind the mystic notion of the cosmos. It's like the day actually does pour forth speech, and the night actually does give knowledge, and yet there are no words that we can discern, and there's no voice of them that we can hear, but yet their voice goes out through all the earth. It's very interesting. That I love that beauty in that.
And I love that phrase, making the wise, makes the wise simple, or the wisdom is simple.
Yeah.
It's, I think about music, where there are composers that have been so profound, like Mozart, where the music and the tunes can seem so simple, but they're some of the most difficult music to perform, to sing, to play, mainly because they are, I don't know, the notes are just put together so brilliantly.
Yes.
And to just be able to offer them in a simple way. I also think about children, and how children can sometimes say things that are so wise because we've got so much stuff in our heads and they don't have anything but what they've learned so far, whatever that means. And sometimes we ignore it because we think, oh, they just have no idea. Oh, well, maybe you're the one that doesn't have any idea.
Right.
So it's that whole idea of wisdom being simple. It's just so profound.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And the other thing about this tent for the sun being given this very special duty, not just to bring the rays of sunlight back and forth over and all, but to also reveal and make plain those things that we try to hide. Nothing is hidden from that. That is a role that is assigned. We usually think of in our literature, we don't delve in our understanding of things. We don't usually delve into the mythological notions of the creation narrative and all of the assignments that are given to the things in the cosmos. Like everything has a purpose. And that purpose is not just sort of like to, give us the plants and give us the, to sort of bring the rays and raise the chlorophyll and all that other stuff. But it has this divine way of like revealing things, and it acts for God, so that when God looks down during the sun, God can see, oh, okay, nothing is hidden, and I see what is going on here. But that was a purpose, an original purpose for the sun when God said, let there be light. And it has its tent that it goes into. And this whole notion of a bridegroom coming out on his wedding night, after his wedding night, and running with joy and saying, I'm going to run to the ends of the heavens and then come back.
Yeah. Tremendous visual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tremendous visual. Beautiful.
Oh, I love it.
Energy.
There's so much power in the sections of this psalm, which is why I wanted to list out in the very beginning, like those different sections that it was talking about, because it's so powerful. Yeah. Very coherent. Very coherent. So that is this beautiful psalm that leads us. And then there's, of course, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. It's just the power of this, the heavens themselves and the firmament above us. And it has nothing to do with anything else, but just this cosmos is revealing God to us. How beautiful that is. And that's a classical piece, isn't that, Andrea?
It is. It's from when you were talking about the creation. It's called The Creation.
Right. Because I remember singing that. I know that I sung that before. I've sung that before.
Right.
The heavens are telling the glory of God. I'm going to listen to that when I get home, I think. Put it on my Spotify.
A beautiful piece. Yep.
Yeah. Sang that in high school, actually. Yeah. All righty. We got a lot to go through tonight with the Decalogue.
Oh, boy.
This is the first reading here is Exodus 21 through 17. We heard about the law and the precepts and everything as they're described in the book of Psalms, but we're going to go back now to the very first writing down of what these words are. And I'm going to not call them the Ten Commandments, even though we know them as the Ten Commandments. And we're going to call them here the Decalogue, because we want to know that these words that we have here today are very much conflated with how we know the Ten Commandments. And we know the Ten Commandments from the book of Deuteronomy, when they were reformulated into like a list. So Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, is the second telling of the law. Deutero second, it's like the second law. So it's really the retelling of the law. And Deuteronomy says, okay, we're going to take everything that we've done before in these first 4 books, and we're going to encapsulate it so that you can carry around your cliff notes with you. if you will. Deuteronomy are like the cliff notes of the Torah. So we're going to go back to Exodus, where these words first come. And note here that they are not numbered or titled. And later on in Exodus chapter 34, when they're called 10 words, or that is 10 sayings or 10 matters. And there's some words that I had to look up today. It's set forth in apodictic, in absolute form, but they are not universal laws, nor are they a concise summary of biblical law. Rather, and hear this, in this first telling of these words and these sayings, they are unconditional community precepts, injunctions and prohibitions rather than laws, which typically laws have punishments. Think of like what Paul was saying and how these sayings evolved into punishable laws, right? Unlike other ancient Near Eastern materials, the Decalogue creates moral standards for a society. So think about what has happened. They have been in the wilderness. They have come from 400 years of bondage. They've been worshiping to another god. You know, they built the golden calf. They wanted to go back to Egypt. All this other stuff. They're questioning. And God is saying, I need them to figure out how they're going to be in community. If you think about it, even going back to Abraham, that's why Abraham sends his servant all the way to his brother's encampment to another land to find a wife for Isaac. Is because there are certain parameters that they want to keep in the community, and all clans and tribes do this in terms of, but this is the first one that has unconditional community precepts. These injunctions and prohibitions. Obedience is to be a function of divine authority, not fear or punishment. This is one of the first times where obedience to these standards for a society bring you closer to the divine authority. And you do it because you want to be closer to God, not because you're afraid of what's going to happen if you don't. Containing more than 10 statements and not numbered in the Bible, they are counted in diverse ways, and I'll read some more about that directly after our hearing of this. However, the first several deal with human obligations to God and are accompanied by motive clauses, explanations. The others concern social issues and do not mention God. Now, because its pronouns are all, and this is what we're talking about with community standards, right? Moral standards for a society. Because its pronouns are all second person masculine in the singular, the Decalogue seems to address individually adult men responsible for land-holding Israelite households with servants, as in verse 17, with its stipulations that it has, otherwise applying to all other people as appropriate. Yet in Hebrew also, the masculine singular can be and often is also inclusive. But primarily, this is for the elite, the higher ups, those people who own land, who are the head of the households, so that the structure of the community does not fall apart. And then when they see that people are rising, or people are doing things that are going against what these rules that are set aside for them, that are going to break apart their household and their tribe, they call people to say, this is not the way that we behave. So in order to shape a society, to go across the Jordan and to be a nation, God is laying forth these moral standards. So now here, Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And I heard someone say, when you saw me stop at the semicolon at verse 2, where it says, I am the Lord your God. And I guess you know why I did that, don't you?
Yes.
Why? Say it out loud.
I am is the Lord your God.
Right. I say I take a break for the reference to Exodus 3:14, where God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. Because in this particular text, Moses has the problem of not knowing God's name back in 3:14. For Moses needs to know which deity is calling him. And I'm bringing this up because I want us to understand how this setting the moral standards for the community and building a community with this Decalogue here and these verses, that it's important for all the gods that Moses has been exposed to in Egypt and everywhere else throughout all of his travels, that he knows that the name of the God, or this God that is calling him the God that is speaking to him. The verse renders the first name in Hebrew, Eye, Ashe, Eye, that God provides. A shortened form, I am, Eye, renders the second. Because the Hebrew is actually grammatically problematic, the translations can be uncertain. For example, the four letters YHWH, which are the words for Yahweh, pronounced Yahweh. The YHWH is from a root meaning to be. God's name thus has a verbal rather than a noun form. It is not just God, it is God being and doing. Still, the meaning gets to be uncertain. However, the active nature is certain. God is always doing, and God is always being. I am, he says here, the Lord your God. I am being your God. I am doing all the things for you as your God. For example, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So therefore, this is why you will have no other gods before me. Now, I'm going to go through this, I didn't write these notes because it would have been 3 or 4 pages of my typing, and I didn't have time to do all the typing. But I'm going to talk about just some of these, the way that they go. So 4 through 6, worship God without anthropomorphic images, perhaps distinguish Israelite religion from those of their neighbors. How many other ancient societies do we know of that, even in Egypt, when we look at the hieroglyphics, we see birds that are represented as the gods, or other animals and oxen and bulls and so on and so forth. God, and even in the images of persons, God's like, none of that. No anthropomorphic thing. And this will set you apart so that when people see you and they don't see any statues around you, they will know who you are and who your God is. Idol, pesel, is a carved image. Jealous or zealous. Zealous or jealous God is a recurring phrase indicating God's passionate resolve to deal with those worshiping with other generations. And I will do this for the other generation. Transgenerational guilt is also explained in a little bit of the 34th chapter, but it's also in Genesis 15:16. Is sometimes rejected in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. God's name represents God's presence, is potent, and cannot be misused, as in false oaths. The Sabbath is to be holy. Holy means to be set aside, sacred, consecrated. The same Hebrew word is consecrated. That is distinct from other days and is directed to God as creator. Remember these days suggests that memory involves action. Perhaps skilled work, though the term is never defined in any Sabbath legislation. However, cooking is implied. In verse 10, just giving you some of the background so you can see this is really sort of shaping up how community acts. Verse 10, wife is omitted from the otherwise inclusive list of 7 entities enjoined to observe the Sabbath. Perhaps because she is included in you. You shall not do any work, and you and your wife are partners and helpmeets with one another. Perhaps that is the case. In verse 12, this parental authority, akin to that of God, likewise deserves your honor, where glory is from the same root of honor. So glory your father and your mother. Murder is forbidden, but not killing in war or in capital punishment. Adultery is sexual intercourse between a man and a married or betrothed woman and is a grave offense. Why? Because lineages could be compromised by this infidelity. So you don't want somebody bearing a son of yours whom you think is going to be your first son, and they get all of the benefit of all of your land and your other natural children don't. It's sort of a precursor to Ishmael being sent off, right? Theft, verse 15. Theft of both persons and property is prohibited. The Hebrew word for kidnap is the same word as steal. Forbidding false witness indicates concerns for justice. Don't lie against your neighbor, especially because most people, when they do lie against their neighbor, they're building up some sort of a story to take something from them, to take their land, to get them in trouble with something like that. So this is all starting to build up. You're starting to see how it's building up now as a moral construct so that the society can exist in itself. Verse 17. Let me get to verse 17. Where am I here? Okay, you shall not covet. Consider 2 separate precepts in the same tradition. This one addresses the male of the household, forbidding the mental process of coveting. The cause of transgressions of adultery and theft, already prohibited in 14 and 15, is unusual, but the intense emotional state of covet here implies the results of that state as well as the state itself. Covet appears twice in succession, first before the general category of house, and the second before an enumeration of some of the household's components. So when you look at these all together, you get a bigger sense of how this Decalogue, which in the book of Deuteronomy and throughout how it's explained in Leviticus and the how you sort of go about your mea culpa and your confession and how you get pure again from going against these, it gets codified into law. It gets codified into practice from this moral code that God is laying down, that if you do these things, your society will thrive. If you do these things, I will be worshiped and I will be pleased. If you do these things, your household and your lineage will be secure, and there will be enough for everybody if you do these things. So this is the Decalogue that I wanted to speak to you about, in the sense of how the aspirations of God to build this community, to be at peace with one another and to thrive and to set them apart from other communities. For example, no graven images, to set them apart from other people who are doing traitorous things and talking against one another and stealing from one another. God's saying, don't do all of that, because you're going to be different. And there will be even a day where everyone that you are associated with in your land, even your livestock, will not do a darn thing. So this is our Decalogue, our shaping of society, our shaping of culture. And once human beings try to, very often, this happens very much with laws as well. What ends up happening is, after they're set, we try to interpret them. And we try to interpret them for the good of our desires, or for what we think we need. And very often so that those who are higher up can benefit much more than those who are lower on the totem pole of status. But here we have this. So I've talked enough and read enough. So what do you all think about the Decalogue in this fashion?
I learned this in the King James Version. There are several words that are different, that the words are used different. Just as a simple example, thou shalt not kill, as opposed to murder. But then the interpretation that you read, said there's an exception.
Right.
So I guess my question then is, what's is it kill, or is it murder, and if so, is there an exception?
It is hearkening us back to Cain and Abel. You shall not murder your brother. Remember, you shall not murder your people. You shall not kill your people. But war is a different matter. And capital punishment is a different matter for people that are sinning. That's all cleared up in Leviticus and so on and so forth. But it's really mostly concerned with the idea of not just indiscriminate killing, but it's really much more concerned. And usually the King James Version, to be honest with you, is much closer to the Hebrew. But this is much closer to the intent of the context of the Hebrew. And in Deuteronomy, the King James Version would be much closer to the Hebrew that you're reading right now. So this is a more amorphous in a way, and then it gets clarified and codified in Deuteronomy. So this murder is very specific about the people who came from Abraham. Those of us who are in this camp together, these are the people you shall not murder. Because I won't consider it just killing. I will consider this murder. And murder, as we know from Cain and Abel, is a much stronger sense of killing for God. That makes sense.
Definitely.
What are some of the other changes? Because the King James Version is very often how many of us know this.
It talks about the graven images. I think that's up in the second. I mean, when I went to school with the Seventh-day Adventists, okay, we memorized the Ten Commandments,
Right.
and so um, this is exactly what I memorized, except a different translation. And it's just interesting to see the differences for the idol versus graven image, for example. Um, um, yes. So,
But and if you go deeper down in there, that is on the earth or that is in the water or under the earth, bow down or worship them. This is like taking care of everything. And there are other ways that people, there have been some interpretations about how people can even say, well, the grain that we're growing, I when you sort of connect those, even if you connect crops and earth and other stuff to that, God is really being very clear. It's just like, don't make anything into an idol, whether in form or anything else. And it can be, and graven image is mostly the images that people were using to worship. They were carving, and engraving images. So that makes sense for that as well.
and then you shall not make wrongful use of the name. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain, for the Lord will not hold him or her guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Um, I guess that's what this says, but taketh the name in vain versus wrongful use of the name of the Lord. I wonder if that can be interpreted differently, depending on the translation.
I think, what do we say? The idea of the wrongful use is much more akin to other communities. When you think about it in context of the other communities around them and saying, for example, I'm going to do something that's totally anachronistic. By great Zeus, I swear that this will happen to you. And zounds, and thanks to Zeus, we were able to do this and blah, blah, blah. And just using God's name in that capacity rather than in reverence and in glory, this way of reducing the power and the glory of God, just for our regular conversation and our regular use, and that takes it and separate, and that throws it into the mundane.
Yeah.
And I think also that, and this particular scripture is one of the reasons why, even to this day, many persons do not speak the name of God. They don't speak Yahweh's name, and you'll see in many literature, many Hebrew texts and translations that there's like G_D, or there's another name, I forget it is. I don't have my other translation with me today, but in one of them there's like this whole other, all throughout the Old Testament, there's a whole other way of describing God that sort of talks around it, but doesn't mention the Lord God at all. So any use of the name of God is a misuse.
And an example comes to mind when I was signing some legal papers and I had to use a notary. And before we signed the papers, she asked me to swear that I was the person I said I was, and so forth and so on, whatever the rest of the statement was. But she said, "Are you comfortable swearing in the name of God?" And I was impressed with the fact that she asked me,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't remember having not used a notary that I guess did that. I hadn't remembered that was a part of the process.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And even in some courts, the promise, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
So help you God, or not.
And many modern courts nowadays, that last part is taken off.
Right. Right. Right.
Why did the jealousy cause the punishing of the children for the parents' iniquity?
Oh, great question.
That's a great question, and it's a deep question. I'm going to start out with a deflection, a little bit of a deflection. Part of it is because I love looking at it and saying that if you do this, I will do all of this kind of punishment, even to the fourth generation. But if you show this steadfast love, I will show steadfast love to the thousandth generation. So the incentive is more about the thousandth generation of blessings than it is the fourth. However, think about how long they've been in the wilderness and think about why they were so long in the wilderness, and think about the generations of people that walked out of the gate of Egypt that did not walk across the Jordan River into the promised land. It's been about 4 generations. So it is a reminder to you that those who are not with you here are partly because, Moses and Joshua, they all lasted, and they all lasted throughout this entire 40-year excursion. But those of you who didn't follow me, who didn't love me, who wanted to go back, they're not here anymore. And you are the final generation after that. And this is your opportunity to make right what they made wrong. It's a reminder to also go back into your history. And I think that God says in this particular text, the way that it's written down is that, and this mode of me acting, I reserve the right to do it at any time. And of course, it does say that in Jeremiah and Isaiah, there is some shift in that as time moves forward. And then, of course, with Jesus, when he heals that man, he says, so who sinned, his mother or his father?
Right.
Right.
No one did. It has nothing to do with them. It came so that I can show you, it came to show the glory of God. That's why. Because that I'm not holding that anymore. That gets lifted.
Right.
And it also doesn't say, I will punish the children to the third and fourth
There you
generation.
go.
It implies a possibility, or I can if I want to, as you were saying. So, because you always think, oh no, if I did this, is that going to affect, my children and their children and their children and their children? And that's not really, in this interpretation anyway, that's not what this says.
And I've been looking at this. I had a huge come down debate with someone who went to a Catholic church yesterday, who heard a sermon about Isaac being sacrificed, and it just triggered him thinking that God could ask Abraham to do that. So we were on conversation all afternoon coming down from that whole idea of like, how could God do that? He was angry, he was hurt, he was upset. And it was a great conversation. It was a great way of moving through the text. But this whole thing about the generations and from the time of Noah, even, if you just want to go back to Noah, this whole let's wipe out these people. Let's wipe out the iniquity and pull it out at the root, so that if your great-great-great-great-grandparent has misused the name of God and has the ability to do that, and your mother heard it, then your mother is most likely going to pass it down to you, and the generations will remember it. So perhaps it's the fourth generation to erase the memory as well. There's that possibility. But there are all these kinds of other notions, because I'm trying to get us to think about it in terms of like, how are we trying to shape this community, right? Because even when they come back from exile, it's like they're crying about, oh, but the temple was so beautiful, blah, 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 blah. It's like, tell those people to be quiet. It's going to be even more beautiful. These are such great conversation partners, especially comparing it with the King James version, because I think that the King James version of "Thou shalt not" and so on and so forth is absolutely where we're at when we get to the Deuteronomy. When we get to Deuteronomy, wow.
Can I say, I think that this idea of punishment through the generations, has provided a stumbling block for many, particularly Black people who hold on to the idea of generational curses.
Right.
And preaching that story that you mentioned about when they ask who sinned, and I took a stand against generational curses, and my congregation was a bit in turmoil.
Ooh.
Because they do believe, many of them do believe that they blame so much either in their own lives or in others' lives on generational curses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can let them know that in Jeremiah 31, 29 through 30, and Ezekiel 18, it's rejected. Even though
I said amen.
Amen. Jeremiah 31, 29 through 30. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's very interesting, like I said, how it gets revealed in the prophets. And it's probably to try and get the people to shake being stuck in exile and saying we don't have to wait for 4 generations to get out of exile. God's got another plan for us.
Have you ever had a conversation with Rabbi Amichai, about this whole notion of generational?
No, I have not.
Because I wonder what the Jewish people in the Jewish faith believe or say or do around that whole notion.
I do. One of the sensibilities that has come from working with communities, is some of that I really don't feel it as much because of the suffering of the tragedies and the traumas. Folks don't see any logic in that, and there's even transgenerational curses would not logically speak to the Holocaust, would not logically speak to the destruction of the temple, would not logically speak to what happened at Masada, and all of these other things would not logically speak to you name it. That's been my take lately in my relationships, is that so that this transgenerational curse, maybe it's in a lot more of the liberal traditions of Judaism, but this transgenerational curse is not the kind of God that many people embrace, or that some people can embrace.
Well, saying that God will show steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who
Right.
love me and keep my commandments, then why wouldn't the other side be true as well?
I don't know, because it's not comfortable. Quite
When you say
honestly.
the Holocaust and all these other things that happened thousands of or generations or hundreds and hundreds of generations apart.
And I think also that, part of it, just in terms of how the Bible is used, this is one of those texts that has caused harm because it has been used as an excuse to oppress people. Even Presbyterians, it's like, you are not God's chosen. You are not God's elect, until that got theologically rerouted. But it became, for a lot of American enslavers, who were Presbyterian and others, This was the reason why you could justify having slaves. This is your lot in life in a way. This is where you're supposed to be. You were savages and you're paying for your savagery through the generations. So this text is one of those texts it's so easy to weaponize, to traumatize people. And I think that many folk are, conversely on the other side, are looking for the liberation from that, rather than assigning this transgenerational guilt as the reasoning for suffering. It's combating the weaponizing of the texts that have done so much harm over the hundreds of years. It's one theological notion that holds up a lot of weight in liberation theology. Whew. Some deep stuff, y'all. So, my friends, that is our Decalogue, which can go. We could do an entire month on the Decalogue, entire year probably, doing the comparison between the St. James, the New Revised Version, and the Torah, from the Hebrew transliteration that I have here, the Tanakh, and also between a comparison between all of those texts and Deuteronomy as well. So that's a real study. That might be a course I teach about preaching. Okay, so anyway. Let us move to, I know I'm like taking mental notes. I'm like, okay, that's good. A second reading, and Reverend Lacey, you really enticed me to think about that. How do we preach these texts for liberation in communities that hold them so dear, in different ways? So interesting. So our second reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 through 25. This Lenten season is taking us all around the world in our texts, and I've been trying to draw a pathway with them. It's just been very interesting. But this is a message about the folly of the message of the cross, the foolishness. Paul acknowledges that his preaching is foolishness to the educated elite, but asserts that God has confounded the wisdom of this world. I love that. 1 Corinthians 18 through 25. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks desire wisdom. But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Ooh.
Mic drop.
I know, right?
That's good.
Oh, yes. This message about the cross. Paul provocatively reduces the content of all of the gospel, quote unquote, good news, now I put in parentheses, to a single shameful event, the cross. The Greek word moria foolishness has a social stigma that we don't quite get. We don't attach it to most communities' Western English usage of that word foolish or folly. In the Greek, it's better to think of it as a vulgar joke. Now, I always grew up knowing that if you got called foolish, that was not a good thing.
No.
But for our purposes in this text, realize that Paul is saying, he is mentioning that foolishness, if you are foolish, then it is a huge social stigma to be a fool. And yet he's claiming it. So this is a provocative argument that he means. And this word message about the cross literally means the word of the cross. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. In our New Revised Standard Translation of the Greek, it says, so I will again do amazing things with his people, shocking and amazing. The wisdom of their wise shall perish, and the discernment of the discerning shall be hidden. The reason I read you the difference between those two is because this text that I just read is from the Isaiah, the Greek, the Hebrew Greek that we have in our Bibles and our First Testament. This Greek, this Hebrew here that Paul is translating, that Paul is using, is from the Septuagint. It is the Greek translation of the Hebrew. So in Corinth with the Gentiles, and most people, when the Torah and the prophets and all those things were retranslated by the Roman government and said, you can no longer do that, you will read this, you will read Greek. This is the language that many people knew of this ancient text. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. So he shifts it a little bit to their understanding. And then to further complicate things, the discernment of the discerning I will thwart literally translates to the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. And I like that one a lot better.
Oh, yeah.
I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate.
Wow.
I know, isn't that great? Isn't that great?
Well, I just looked up the word thwart because I wasn't sure what it meant exactly. And it says in the Oxford Languages Dictionary or whatever online, it uses a verb. It means to prevent someone from accomplishing something.
Right.
Quote, he never did anything to thwart his father. And it's not a word we use in everyday English speech. But yeah, what you just said, talking about frustrating.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
So you will never reach your level. You will never reach that for which you are discerning.
That's right. That's right. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this verse 20 is this rhetorical question. I'm getting to the point now where we're starting to understand how powerful this speech really is. It's the beginning of Corinthians, and Paul is upset with these people. Remember, where is the one who was wise? Paul's rhetorical questions mock the educated elite by means of culturally specific titles of dignity. The Jewish scribe is not merely a skilled copyist, but an expert in the scriptures. Where is the scribe? And the debater is a philosophical researcher, highly esteemed in the Hellenic world.
PhD.
Yeah, a PhD in research and how to argue and debate. Yes. Yes. So this notion that he's talking about, he's like laying it out there, because Corinthians were known to be impressed with intelligence and wisdom and all things and being smart and wise. So this is where he sort of hits him with that. Well, where is the one who's wise? Where is the scribe? God has done this thing. Has not God made foolish this wisdom of the world? 21. Paul shapes a playful contrast between two types of wisdom. On the one hand, a divine attribute, the wisdom of God, and on the other hand, a human attainment. Because, the world didn't come to know God through wisdom. God decided that it was through the foolishness of our proclamation that people would be saved, those who believe anyway. Now, Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom. I found a quote from Herodotus, which is written in 484, who lived in 484 to 425 BCE. And this is in his particular work, the work of Herodotus, 477.1 or something like that. The desire for wisdom among the Greeks was proverbial. It was known. And he wrote, I have heard, however, another tale, very different from this, which is told by the Peloponnesians. They say that Anacharsis was sent by the king of the Scyths to make acquaintance with Greece, that he went and on his return home reported that the Greeks were all occupied in the pursuit of every kind of knowledge. So wisdom and knowledge has been tantamount as an aspiration since this 5th century, and also all throughout the Hellenist time when the Greeks were in charge, and it transferred in this Hellenic period through the Roman time. So this is what is being saying, that this is what stands in the way. And the word signs is used in the book of John, remember, as well as all of the miracles that Jesus did. Because in the book of John, it's not miracles, he does 7 signs. So Jews demand signs. Can you show us a sign? And we'll see that in our next text. And then here, but to those who are called, both Jews and the Greeks, this first, also in 23, but we proclaim Christ crucified. The 1st century BCE orator, Cicero, attests, when we're talking about this cross being a stumbling block, Cicero attests that the constraint upon discourse about the cross among persons of higher social class, he wrote, the mere mention of the word cross is shameful to a Roman citizen and a free man.
Wow.
And remember, last week we said that shame is equal to being weak.
Yeah.
So you don't talk about it. It's only associated with those who are weak. It's only associated with those who are shameful. So we don't even speak of it. So for us to claim the cross makes it even deeper that this is foolishness, right? And in formulating the paradox of the crucified Christ as the power and wisdom of God, Paul empowers phrases that sound positively blasphemous. God's foolishness, God's weakness is blasphemy. And yet he uses it to make his point. Ooh. Yeah, Paul was a little upset with them for
Yes, he was.
the way they were acting. In the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom. If you're not going to listen to God's wisdom in order to understand how God is trying to bring you to salvation, then perhaps the only way you can understand is through foolishness. And Lord knows that I'm not going to talk about anything else. I'm only going to say, how many times do you see the example of somebody saying, I told that child not to touch that hot stove. I gave them the wisdom, but it was only through the foolishness of touching it that they learned.
Good example.
Oh, I like that. Oh, boy. So there we are. And also the Jews demanding signs. It's like they're always waiting for a Messiah, someone who's going to come to do signs. That's why every iteration of a Messiah in the first century that we know about, the 7 or 8 other ones that were around, that were claiming to be Messiah around Jesus, they were all performing signs and healing and doing this and doing all these like quote unquote signs that were supposed to be the signs that the Messiah had come. So the Jews are always demanding signs, and the Greeks are always desiring this wisdom. So this is Paul's case. And then we get to this incredible notion in our gospel text of John chapter 2, 13 through 22. Jesus in the Jerusalem temple, and he turns over tables. Note how early on this is in Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of John. In Matthew, it's in chapter 21, verses 12 through 13. Mark, it's in chapter 11, verses 15 through 18. Luke, chapter 19, verses 45 through 46. Because in the synoptic Gospels, which those are, the synopses, if you were to do a synopsis of each of them, they would be very similar. Jesus' actions in the temple occur at the beginning of the Passion narrative and precipitate his death. Here, the episode occurs early in Jesus' ministry. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their table. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Then the Jews said, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. This is the first of 3 Passover festivals that Jesus attends in his ministry in John. This one, chapter 6, 4, and chapter 11, 55. Verses 14 through 16, selling animals for sacrifices in the temple was common practice. If you remember in Leviticus, when they tell you, you got to take 2 turtle doves, you got to sacrifice a beautiful sheep. If you're coming in on a pilgrimage because you've been thrown and dispersed and you become the diaspora, you can't bring all this stuff with you. So it's okay for it to be sold here, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing. He pours out the coins of the money changers. Only this gospel talks about Jesus wielding a whip of cords. Now, the whip of cords is one that the supervisor of the market in an ancient city would have done. They would have been the ones like moving people around with this whip of cords and changing everything. But Jesus creates this same tool. And the money changers, whose face is on the coin?
Caesar.
And Caesar's money in the temple, as an honor to Caesar, is a sacrilege. So the money has to be changed to shekels. Roman currency needed to be exchanged for Jewish coinage to pay the temple tax. And here, Jesus critiques the practice itself rather than the corruption, as in the synoptic versions in Mark, and Mark in particular. So here Jesus is complaining that there is a tax in the temple and a tax on changing the money That's why the prices are so exorbitant. There's this huge tax to change money. So that those who are coming in good faith with an open heart to try and do what they need to do to become clean, to bring their sins before God, cannot be cleared because they cannot follow what is asked of them, what they have sworn to God that they would do in the covenant, because the money changers are charging too much money to change the money so that they can afford to buy what they need. This corruption in John is more important than some of the other ways that we look about all these things just being sold in the temple and in the temple courtyards. It's this system of allowing this to happen in the temple. Now,
So Derek, if they sold the things and the animals and the money went to the church, would that have changed it?
well, it would have changed it if it was at a normal rate and people weren't making money off of the poor people who were doing their best to try and do the sacrifices that were needed to sort of make amends to God for the sins that they had committed.
Okay.
So buying and selling the animals for the shekels is not the issue. It's the whole idea of having, number one, having this exorbitant rate to change the money, which is of lesser value, but to change the money, that there is a rate that goes on top of that. It's like going to the currency exchange and knowing that the rate for $1 is really like 50 cents on the dollar, and someone charges you $2 in order to get your 50 cents for that country you go to. So your money doesn't go as far. And this is a hindrance to people's being able to be true and in relationship with God. And Jesus doesn't quite like that. And his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." These memories of this tradition are shaped by the scripture and Jesus' death. In Psalm 69:9, it reads, "It is zeal for your household that has consumed me. The insults of those who insult you have fallen on me." So the disciples are saying, oh, we see what he is saying in my Father's house. He is taking the insult of his Father and the crime against his Father as an insult on him. It's a powerful quote to use here in this particular space. The Jesus comment, of course, is misunderstood, saying, "I'll raise this temple up in 3 days," as is a regular occurrence in this gospel that things are misunderstood. This temple has been under construction for 46 years. Herod the Great began a major expansion of the Jewish temple complex in 20 BCE, making it the largest sacred space in the entire Roman world. Think about that. The largest sacred space in the entire Roman world. So for 46 years, this is being built and built up, but it has nothing to do with the temple. It has nothing to do with the inner sanctum where God resides, where God comes to be with God's people. Herod is just making this structure to brag and to show off and to show the power of Rome, because, it looks incredible in this space that Rome is now occupying, and he belongs to Rome. So this temple complex, that's why it's not, I say the temple complex in 20 BCE, 46 years they're saying. And now when it says that you will raise up, Jesus says, "I will tear this temple down," please note that at the writing of John, the temple was already destroyed. It was destroyed in 70 CE, 4 years after a start of a Jewish revolt, the last straw of the people was that there was promised to be put a gold statue of Caesar within the parameters of the temple. And that was the last straw, was to have an idol in the temple.
Jeez.
So after that skirmish, the Jews tore everything down, and they even took the menorahs, and they said that some of the spoils were used to make an ark of triumph in Judea. So Jesus' words, as they are placed years afterwards, after this temple has been destroyed, the words are placed here to suggest that Jesus is the replacement for the temple, not for the building. Jesus is now where God inhabits, Jesus, and where God resides. I will be raised up in 3 days. I will be the same. I am God, and I will be the same. God will live in me. This building does not matter. And so Jesus' words have a place alongside Scripture in the disciples' memory. So the disciples are saying that all of these are holy words that Jesus has spoken here in this very, very early chapter, the second chapter of John. So this economic, spiritual blasphemy of saying God will reside in me and I will raise it up and I'm not giving you the sign that you need comes after the first sign of Jesus, and all he did previously was change water into wine. And then he does this in the next chapter. John ain't playing. This symbolic prediction of Jesus' death and resurrection. Destroy this temple in 3 days and I will raise it up. But I love that zeal for your house will consume me. Your thoughts that we have for our final moments of this text. So we see how in the very beginning in our Exodus text, as we're shaping up the moral code and the moral parameters of Israel before they go and become a people in the promised land after 4 generations of wilderness traveling, we see that there is a shift all of these years later into how things have sort of degraded. And God is like, things have got to change. And so Jesus comes and brings salvation, and Paul claims that salvation for all. Jesus is claiming it is a holy and a good thing that this temple will be raised in 3 days. That is the good news. And Paul is saying, yeah, the foolishness of which these temple people were saying, this has been under construction for 46 years and you will raise it up in 3 days. That is a foolish argument, Jesus. Paul claims that foolishness is salvation. I guess that's one of the reasons why they put these texts together.
Yep.
But to go from a people that are trying to figure out their covenant relationship with God and what that means to be a community, that all these years later, it's so organized that they are coming to Jerusalem to now pay for these sins that they committed against the 10 Commandments that they had to pay for with Levitical taxes and sacrifices and so on and so on. It gets all convoluted. And Jesus is saying, this is happening in my Father's house.
And this is also from the First Testament to the New Testament, the law, and then there's this almost reality of some of these things that God said in the Ten Commandments.
Right.
And here we have it again in Jesus' time, being the sort of spokesperson, if you will,
Yeah.
of what God said in the Old Testament.
It's pretty wild. So I
What
love.
does it?
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what does it mean when it says Jesus does not do miracles, but things he does are known as signs?
In the book of John, what they say is, when they say this is one of the first of the signs that Jesus did, but they don't call them miracles, even though because in the book of John they're trying to line it up that it is not, because everybody else is claiming that they're doing miracles around, right? But they're using the language signs because the Jews are looking for signs. These signs of the Messiah that they're looking for, these incredible signs. And the first one, even though it was a small one of changing water from wine, is not that small when you think of it, because we've talked forever about how controlling water and organizing water's molecules can only be done by someone divine.
Absolutely.
Because when God separated the waters, only God could control that. When Jesus said, "Peace be still," and the waves stopped, they said, "Surely this man is of God." Because mythologically, and even in the context of this, anything that can control the water, which is uncontrollable,
Uncontrollable. I'm telling you.
has got to be connected to God.
Yes.
So this sign of turning water into wine is not just innocuous. This innocuous will make good wine for the wedding party. So John gives him that little bit of a sign that looks sort of like on the surface of things, but in a larger context, it is a preeminent way of showing that you are connected to God. And the next thing he does is goes into the temple and clears out the money changers. He goes home and cleans up daddy's house. So it is a sign that will lead him to these next things that he does throughout the gospel. A signpost that leads us to the idea finally that he is the Messiah and he is the one.
Right.
As we read.
As you read through John, will you find the 7 signs?
Yes. Yes. Some are raising. There's some healing. There's some raising. One raising of the dead. I think one raising of the dead. Yeah, there are about 7 of them. And I can't remember them off the top of my head.
Okay, when I go through it, I'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, the 7 signs. This is good stuff. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace.
Yes. Is this the same place in another translation where it's called a den of thieves? Or is
Yes.
that another spot? Okay.
Well, it may be in one of the other. It may be in one of the other of the Gospels as well. I haven't checked. I didn't cross-reference all 3 of them. Here, but it's definitely my Father's house here, a marketplace or a den of thieves. Same thing, yeah. But this is really about the tax.
Yes.
Right.
Taxing people's salvation.
That's a sermon title.
Woo!
Taxing people's salvation. Yeah. Thank you.
You are more than welcome. It's that time too, right?
Good side, huh?
Yes.
Mhm.
Oh
Go
boy,
ahead, brother.
some good stuff, I tell you. Well, thank you all for going on this journey with me today. We did a lot,
Yes.
especially with
It's
that
very
Decalogue stuff.
informative.
Woo!
Mhm.
Wow.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Before you close, can I
Mhm.
ask, has everyone seen this week's Amsterdam News? In their history section, they mentioned the Reverend John Gloucester, founder of they title him the founder of the first Black Presbyterian Church in the United States.
Ah.
And the church they're referring to is Siloam.
Oh.
I don't know. And there's a big picture of him at the whole page. In case you can get your hands on it, I think it's a little bit, it's a little mixed up, but it looks like it's around 1811. I'm not sure of when Siloam was founded, but they name him as the founder of the first Black Presbyterian Church in the United States.
Hmm. Well, we shall see.
Just wanted to share that.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, my friends, let's think about how this moves us along our journey and Jesus getting us back to the way that originally God aspired for us to be a community with one another, which are
Yeah.
those parameters of the Decalogue, not to just follow laws to get away from punishment, but to know that the authority of God and the will of God is for us to live in harmony and to thrive. That's what that Decalogue is really all about, and how far we get from that.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
in this Lenten journey, may we really, oh God, bring to our hearts and to our minds a way to move with you through this by discarding the complications and by embracing the simplicity of your aspirations for us,
Mm.
and knowing that your aspirations for us are so much easier than the complications that we make for ourselves in this world as human beings.
Ain't that something?
Help us to simplify and move with you, O Christ, and be with you and you be with us as we depart from one another, but never from you, O God.
Mm.
In Jesus' name we pray.
Mm.
Let all God's people say amen
Amen.
and amen.
Amen.